is up? I'm Swim. This is the Strim. And we are today going to start a very special series. I'm really looking forward to this one. So for a bit of a reference point, every time I talk to someone about card games, my favorite question always is what's your hot take? Do you think so-and-so is really low key? This is a really good card that's a sleeper that, nobody else thinks is good, right? I think it's just a really interesting thing to talk about. So for this video, or video series, I still haven't decided exactly how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to be presenting my hot takes one at a time. Maybe I'll have a couple per video, but this video will just have one card, or a couple of cards that you might see in the title. But basically, these are going to be my hot takes. These are going to be cards that I think are a lot better than people think they are. So what's showing you right now, you might see on screen, this is my info hub that I was making with Yusu, who helped set up a lot of the backend stuff. And basically, right now, there's kind of two sections of this. That's my star rating. I went through, I took 5 days. I made a star rating of every single card, basically. I recently reformatted this, and it looks a bit uglier right now than it will, even tomorrow. I need to change a few things. But I also have a bit of a meta tier list, which also, this is gonna, by the time you're seeing this video, if you click on the link, because I will link this in the description, this is probably gonna look very different. But this is also a tier list for, basically different decks, a bunch of different lists. These are the main two things, but this page also has some nice charts that are gonna help draw data from that, or use probabilities. Basically, this is all an aside. If you want to check this out, I think this is a helpful resource to a lot of players. It says a spreadsheet. I don't gain anything from you guys clicking. This is not monetized or anything, but I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm generally trying to help you guys with a resource. But anyway, that aside, check that out in the description if you want. But we have this video to talk about, which is my hot takes, episode 1, ELNUKS. So as I was going through this, this process of ranking all the cards, I noticed several of the cards are much higher rated than I immediately would have thought. Because, and every time I notice this, basically I list it out on the side. This is a card that's a hot take. I have a list of 20 different cards right now that I think are all very underrated, and I'm going to be going through them in this series with you guys. But first up, we've got the ELNUKS. So Bull ELNUK and Troop of ELNUK. Basically, Bull ELNUK exists as a 4-mana 4/5. Troop of ELNUK is a 5-mana 3/3 that when you play it, it pulls the top 10 ELNUKS out of your deck. So what we're going to do in this video, I'm going to break down the math behind how ELNUKS work and why they are so damn good. Now, asterisk, they're not nuts. I'm not saying this is a constructed auto-include, but it's a constructed viable card when I think a lot of people might see them as kind of a meme or below viable. The biggest reason for that is simply people trying to use them with Parade Electrovig or counterfeit copies. I did that in a video. You might have seen that on this channel. It was actually a pretty funny video. But that aside, that's a meme. Parade Electrovig and counterfeit copies is just bad. We are going through this video and we're going to basically break down the probability on how many ELNUKS you're going to be pulling using some very basic hypergeometric calculators you can find. And these are tools that if you're interested in kind of doing this kind of math yourself with other things, I would definitely recommend tools like this. So real quick for this, I'm going to bounce my camera over to the other side so you guys can see better. And this is just, Notepad. So we are going to talk about ELNUK math. So in ELNUK math, the first thing to understand is troops are 5-mana 3/3, and of course Bull is a 4-mana 4/5, right? So we'll kind of talk about what that means later. But the biggest thing is basically you want to know how many ELNUKS you are pulling out on average, right? So I think the easiest thing to assume, usually when you're doing probability calculations, I tend to assume you're doing 2 mulligans. Assuming 2 mulligans and assuming play troop on 5. So every calculation here is going to be assuming you did 2 mulligans, although whether you did 1 or 3 or whatever, it's not going to change the math that much. It's going to be very close to an average. And with a lot of probability calculations, being off by less than 0.5% or whatever isn't really going to affect anything in the grand scheme of things, right? So that's not really going to affect the final calculation, okay? So let's break this down. So the basics of the hypergeometric calculator, if you don't know what this is, a hypergeometric calculator is, here, let me pull this up for you, basically a tool that you can use to kind of measure the probability of a certain thing happening in a deck of cards, right? And there's a lot of different ways like this can be expressed. But what I like to use is the hypergeometric calculator that you might see on EtherHub. This is a site for magic, basically, right? And we're gonna kind of talk about like how this works and how you can use this tool yourself if you want. But the basic thing to understand is, okay, let's look at this. We have 37 variables. We're looking for 5 answers, right? If that makes sense. So you've got, I don't know why it says /removable, 37 variables for 5 answers, right? The reason for that is because you assume, so this is not the mulligan draw, basically, but this is currently just the idea of whether the ELNUK will hit or not, right? I'm not going to be breaking down the odds of finding the troop or the odds of finding the bull ELNUK. Those don't really matter for this. When you find the bull ELNUK without the troop, then it's a 4-mana 4/5, right? When you find the troop without the bull, then obviously the troop goes off. When you find the troop with the bull, bull is just a 4-mana 4/5. It's not really a big deal, right? So when you have troop, you're searching 37 cards for 5 potential answers. The reason it's 5 answers, it should be 6, right? But you're playing the troop from hand, the troop of ELNUKS. That's going to search the top 10 cards of your deck, right? And assuming you're playing the troop from hand, there's only 5 answers in your entire deck, right? Now, you're searching through a 37-card deck. The reason for that is fairly straightforward when you think about it a little bit, which is basically, the 37-card deck, it's 1 card is the card you're playing, the troop of ELNUKS. So that makes it a 39-card deck. There's 39 random variables. And you mulliganed 2 cards, which means you kept 2 cards, right? So the 2 cards you kept are going to be also cards that aren't variables. They're not ELNUKS, right? So you've established a situation where you have a 37-card deck, you have 5 different things that you're hitting, and you're searching 10 cards in the population size, right? So, and that's going to be 3 bulls, bull ELNUKS at 4/5, and 2 troops at 3/3, right? So these are kind of the stat lines you're going to want. So now this brings us to the hypergeometric calculator and how we're going to establish the probabilities of these. So let's go ahead and pop over to that. And this is just like any, it's a very, very basic calculation, but it's just for probability in deck. So now this is where we input our stuff. This is the population size. So the population size are like the cards in deck or cards you're drawn from. This is going to be 37 in this case. The sample size are the number of cards that you are able to draw. In this case, that's 10, right? Because you're sampling 10 cards out of the 37 population. The successes in population are going to be 5. We have 5 different successes, right? Because of course, keep in mind, we're looking to see how many of the 5 cards that aren't the troop we played that we hit, because troops will pull other troops. Now they won't chain their abilities, right? The troop that pulled the troop will not get the second ability off, but it still will pull it. You'll still get a 3/3 out of it. And the successes in sample, so what this means is basically number of cards you wanted to draw. So we're going to be changing this every time, but let's just do 1. So by leaving this 1, we're going to get the odds that this pulls 1 ELNUK from troop, right? Let's go ahead and calculate, okay? So chance to hit 1 or more is 81.5%. Very high, right? Very high. Now, I'm going to explain a couple of things at this point, right? First of all, we're not going to do 1 or more. We're going to do exactly 1, and we're going to go by that list, right? So let's say exactly 1 equals 40%, right? This is the odd you hit like 1 of your ELNUKS off of the troop. Pretty good, and you just saw the odds of 1 or more are 81%, right? So basically, the way to do it then, now we have to think, okay, so a lot of you guys are going to be asking, like, if you have drawn like the ELNUK already, doesn't it reduce the odds, right? Like logically, you might think that if you've drawn the bull ELNUK already, then maybe like the odds won't exactly be 80%, because 1 or more. I'll just put this is 81.5%. You might not believe this number, but this number is true, right? If you're assuming 2 mulligans. And the reason for that is because like if you've drawn a bull ELNUK already, then you're right, it has lowered your odds a little bit, pretty significantly. But every time you draw something that's not a bull ELNUK or a troop of ELNUKs, it increases the odds, right? So this is always going to be true if you assume 2 mulligans, right? As counterintuitive as that might be, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where they are in the deck. It's just searching 10 cards, right? Whether like you're drawing a bull ELNUK or you're not, like these odds will be the same overall. They'll be a bit weaker than this when you have drawn an ELNUK already, and they'll be stronger than this when you haven't. But they will be this regardless of whether you've drawn one or not, right? This is just the overall odds, okay? So then we can go back to the Hypergeo calculator and we can say, okay, successes in sample. We saw our successes in sample at 1. Let's calculate for 2. So at 2, we've got 30.2%. So I'm going to go back to the screen and we're going to say exactly 2 equals 30%. And we're rounding a little bit, but it's very, very minor rounding. Let's look at exactly 3. And these get lower. We can say this is 10%. Again, it's very, very minor rounding. This level of rounding is like totally fine for this sort of thing. If this was like super high stakes poker or something, a lot of money on the line, then obviously these like fractions of percentages do matter. But for this, they just truly don't. So basically, you look at this distribution, exactly 0, and we can call that 19% because it's about 19%. There's a very small chance you'll get like 4 or something like that, right? But we're gonna stop listing these. So you'll notice this is just like 1% short of 100, and that's due to minor rounding errors, but also the chance of getting like 4 is gonna be like 1% or something is gonna be really low. You know what? Just for fun, let's go ahead and pop back and see the chance of finding 4 ELNUKs. So yeah, it's like 1.3%. So we can go ahead and like we can punch that in, like why not? Let's say exactly 4 equals 1%. It's gonna be really like a fringe case, doesn't really matter when it happens, but just to add up to 100% here, okay? And I'm just gonna delete this because I just wanted to like talk about like when that would happen, okay? So you look at these numbers and you're like, wow, ELNUKs are pretty good, right? So the biggest thing to be aware of is the troop of ELNUKs. It's going to, when it whiffs, yeah, there's a 19% chance you just played a 5-mana 3/3, and that kind of sucks, right? If there's a 19% chance you just played a 5-mana 3/3, then there's like not a lot you can really do about it, right? But on the other hand, it's really small odds, and you've got really huge chances of just going off like crazy, right? Where, 40% chance you get 1 ELNUK, which is, I mean, that's the highest chances of happening. That's kind of the mode in this probability stack, right? 40% chance you're getting the 1 ELNUK. That's really good. Then you've got the 30% chance of hitting 2, which is, hey, that's nuts, right? So like this huge chunk here, this is going to be happening most of the time. This is 70% of the time you'll get about like 1.4 ELNUKs, right? If you kind of want to average that around like 70%, weight it a bit towards more 1 because it's like 4 instead of 3. You can actually do the ratios there because it's out of 7. So you can do the math pretty cleanly, and you're going to be hitting, what would that be? 1.43 ELNUKs, right? Something like that, if on that 70% chance. That's pretty crazy just in terms of average value. That's really, really good, right? And then obviously like 10% of the time you're going to go crazy. So there's one thing that's a bit of a distractor here. And one last thing that some of you guys might be rightfully pointing out is if you draw 2 bull ELNUKs, or sorry, if you draw 2 troop of ELNUKs, that's bad. And the reason for that is not because it makes your odds worse, because again, the odds will always be, the average odds will always be the average odds. Whether, you draw it, it increases, or it decreases, and you don't draw it, it increases. But if you draw a second troop of ELNUKs, then the second one you play is pretty much going to be a 5-mana 3/3, right? It thins them out of the top 10 cards of the deck. So the second one you're playing is going to be really bad odds as well, right? So then the second question you have to ask is, what are the odds of drawing a second troop of ELNUKs before you're at 5 mana, before you have the ability to play 5 cards, right? And we can do that fairly simply. We can use the same calculator, right? We'll use it in a different way, which is for just normal card draws. So the biggest thing to ask, we already know what our deck size is. It's going to be 38, because this time we're not assuming we have 1 troop in hand. We're going to calculate for having like 2 different troops. So we know we have 38 cards as our potential deck size. And how many cards will we draw by 5 mana? Well, there's 2 on the mulligan. Keep in mind, we will be drawing 2 on the mulligan. There's one on turn 1, there's one on turn 2, there's one on turn 3, and there's one on turn 5. So there's 7 cards total, right? So we will see 7 out of our deck, and we're going to go 7 over 38, right? And then we're going to go ahead and punch in basically the same exact calculation over on our Hypergeometric Calculator. So we've got a population size. This time's 38. This time the sample size is 7. The successes is 3, because that's 3 troops, and the successes in sample is 2, right? We're calculating the odds finding 2 troops of ELNUKS out of 3 troops of ELNUKS off of drawing 7 cards in a 38 card deck, right? Okay, following me? So now we calculate, and we see that's 8%, so 8.1%, which is obviously not super great. It's definitely an additional lose condition here. So drawing 2 troops equals 8%. And that's bad because when we draw 2 troops, even if the first one does high value, the second one is almost doomed to be a 5-mana 3/3. Now, if you're a math nerd, you'll point out, like, it's not doomed to be a 5-mana 3/3. It's just got bad odds at pulling troops because you've probably pulled like 2 troops out, so it's only like searching like 1 or 2 cards. And if we wanted to do the math on that, we could. It's getting like pretty like nitpicky at that point. So let's go ahead and lump this into a failure rate. So exactly 0 or drawing 2 troops is 8% plus 19%. Again, if you're a math nerd, it's not quite as simple as adding these together, but for the sake of, you know, simplicity, we're going to add them together, and we're going to call this a failure rate. Now, you'll notice part of the reason that adding them together doesn't work is we just created a scenario where we're over 100%, right? So exactly 1 gets like a little bit lower. Basically, everything loses a little bit of value. Like this is going to be like 38 or 37% or something. This is going to be like 37. This is going to be like 28 or something like that, right? So you end up in a scenario where the rate is pretty high. So, and this is exactly why I look at this and I don't think this is going to be like a high tier in constructed, but it's definitely a lot better than it immediately looks. And I wanted to kind of talk about, like, you know, A, this is cool. Like this card is, you know, ELNUK and Troop of ELNUKS is a lot better than it seems at first. And B, you know, I wanted to kind of explain like how to use these kind of calculators, because I know there's a lot of people that might be interested in that and that haven't really kind of gotten into that sort of thing, because, you know, you can evaluate cards in a vacuum pretty solidly. What I will say though is Troop of ELNUK is actually nuts in expeditions. They will probably actually, like, I'm not even joking, they will probably have to nerf this card in expeditions a little bit, because it's a little too good. You can keep drafting ELNUKS over and over again, and also in expeditions, like, the idea of just like raw stats matter a lot more. So it's actually probably a little too good for there. In constructed, you know, you might be able to play it in some, like, you know, decks that you can fit it in. They're good budget options because both cards are common. I don't think you'll see like top tier decks running around with these, but they're still strong enough to be on my list of hot takes. All right, so this has been kind of, you know, that pilot for this series. In the future videos, I'm probably gonna be kind of lumping cards together. Like maybe if there's a card I want to talk about for a while, like this will be its own video, but maybe for other cards, I'll jam like 2 or 3 cards into like one video for hot takes series. But I think this will be very fun to do. And there's a lot of very like cool ideas that I have to talk about that you guys are probably going to disagree with. That's the point. They're hot takes. That's kind of what makes it fun. All right. So, you know, that's going to be it for me for this time. And I'll see you guys next time.